Jason Porath. He's going to be talking about the princess Disney won't touch. I'm curious to see who these princesses are. So Jason has worked in the visual effects and animation industry on many films, including Kung Fu Panda and How to Train a Dragon 2. So please welcome Jason on stage. Thank you.
All right, can you hear me? Yay. All right, so there's a list in your head. It's safe, it's censored, and it's short. It's the list of women that you're taught about in history class. And I'm gonna guess that for most everybody in this room, it's pretty similar. You got your Cleopatras, you got your Mary Curies, and you got an endless list of European monarchs, most of whom were probably married to Henry VIII and killed at some point or another. I think we can all agree that's a pretty shitty list. And even when you have someone who's really kind of interesting that you come across, like, say, Joan of Arc, you're not really going to learn all the nitty-gritty and really interesting stuff because, again, this list is censored. So you may learn about Joan of Arc, but you don't really learn about, I don't know, how she was a brutal warlord who was an expert in cannon warfare. You don't even learn the part that makes her story makes any sense, which is that there's another woman, not pictured, named Yolande of Aragon, you're about to learn why she wasn't pictured, who was pulling all the strings from behind the curtain, who she was the one to bring Joan of Arc onto the stage of history, and when Joan of Arc got inconvenient, to brush her off the stage of history. Yolande of Aragon then went on to sink the English in a civil war for about a century after her own death because Yolande of Aragon was a badass bitch. You learn about Harriet Tubman. You may not learn about how Harriet Tubman was a spy master for the Union, how she burnt down plantations, rescued hundreds of slaves at a time, how she carried around a revolver everywhere she went. You get this picture instead of a quiet, unassuming black woman. Badass bitch. You learn about Amelia Earhart, but you may not hear about how she was a polyamorous libertine, and in her marriage contract specified that she was to have an open marriage and was able to sleep with whoever she damn well wanted. So you get the histories, but you don't get all of it, and you don't get all of the really interesting people. Now this is where I come in. I do a project called Rejected Princesses. This is a blog that started a little bit ago, and it's devoted to all the women that are too awesome, awful, offbeat to make it in the mainstream. Now, what I mean by the mainstream, you can probably guess from this picture. So I do illustrations and write-ups of people that you've probably never heard of that are pretty interesting. So this person was a woman named Maria Oktoberskaya, World War II, Soviet. Her husband was killed by the Nazis, so in return, she sold all her belongings, all of their belongings, bought a tank, named the tank Fighting Girlfriend, and started killing Nazis. That's a real person. That actually happened. Her face was on postcards. They still pop up occasionally on eBay. Yeah. Another person. This is a fairly obscure one. A 13th century woman named Shajar al-Dur. She was a concubine who had worked her way up to head wife of Sultanate of Egypt and had a really tough time when her husband died just as France was invading on the 7th Crusade. So, what's a woman to do? Well, she consulted with the military ministers of the time, hid the fact that her husband was dead, saying, oh no, he's just sick, he's not feeling up to seeing anybody, crushed the French, took Louis VII hostage, ransomed him back to France for 30% of France's GDP, and ushered in a golden age with herself as the ruler. Badass bitch. And then you have Ida B. Wells. Now, who here has heard of Ida B. Wells? I'm gonna guess like a handful. Not a ton. So Ida B. Wells, 71 years before Rosa Parks refused to get off of a bus, Ida B. Wells refused to get off of a train. She had to be forcefully removed as she kicked, punched, and bit at people. But this is not what Ida B. Wells should really be famous for, even though it's often what is sort of tossed out there as the first little fact about her. Ida B. Wells was an investigative journalist, and what she investigated was lynching. Now, I'm gonna guess that most of you, when I say the word lynching, have a little image in your head that pops up of like, dude hanging from tree, maybe he was beat up beforehand, maybe he was shot, the end. That is maybe 1% of how horrifying lynching actually was, and it does a tremendous disservice to Ida B. Wells and everybody who went through it to pretend that way. So I will give you a very brief summary of some of the more horrific shit that happened during lynching. It became a public spectacle. It was bring your family, as the whole town would come out for it. They'd sell tickets. They would sell souvenirs, like here's the tree a branch from the tree this person was hanged on. Here's this guy's kneecap. Here are the dying screams that he had as he was burnt alive, recorded like the world's most fucked up ringtone. We don't teach that in history class, and we barely teach her, and it's a shame. That's sort of what I get at. So, I have a pretty wide range of people that I cover. This was taken from the map on my website this morning. It's one of the interfaces for the website. You can sort of see how the sort of diversity of stories I cover all around the world. And this is less than half of all the stories I've told, because I've got another 80 that have not been told on the website that are coming out in a book. I'll get to that in a minute. But yes, I try to cover the entire world's history, not just European monarchs behaving badly. So this is what I used to do. I used to work at DreamWorks Animation. I used to, be the big visual effects person. I'm still doing that right now for a little bit, but hopefully I won't have to go back to it. That all came crashing down the moment this movie came out. Now, what this movie brought with it was a flood of shitty clickbait articles that just kept going around the industry, and everybody would pass them around. And there was one that, in particular, that was pretty bad. That was like top 12 reasons why the Frozen girls are bad role models, which is just bullshit. But it was such preposterous bullshit that it got my coworkers and I to talking at lunch when I was at DreamWorks. Like, okay, if they're bad role models, we can come up with way worse ones. Like, what is the worst idea you can come up with for an animated princess movie? And we kept trying to one-up each other. Like, what is the worst idea you can come up with? And the winner of that conversation was actually so inspired that I just had to illustrate it, and it became the first one that I ever did. The placement of her kicked-up sandal is not an accident. So there's not a lot to this image other than, haha, isn't that fucked up? And I'm a little ashamed of it, honestly, because it's just like, it's a one-note black humor joke, right? But in this conversation that I was having with my friends, because A, I'm a feminist, and B, I'm a trivia junkie, I would just start listing off like all these people, like, oh, wouldn't it be crazy if Disney made a movie about Jingambande of pre-Angola, the Queen of Ndongo, who had a 40-year guerrilla warfare against the Portuguese, and people are like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, more people should know what I'm talking about. I like what I'm talking about, so I started what I ended up doing, right? So I put out 12 online just to see if anybody would like what I was doing. I'd planned on leaving DreamWorks anyways. I had like 12 different projects I wanted to do, and this seemed like, okay, well, it could go viral or it couldn't. I don't know. Maybe other people like what I'm doing. Put it out there, and it went viral pretty quick. Got on front page of Reddit, Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, you name it, it was there. It just keeps like going through cycles. It'll just like occasionally it'll pop up and be like, oh my god, this is amazing, and then it'll die down, it'll pop back up. I got a book deal out of it with HarperCollins. It'll come out later this year. Yay! It'll be 100 entries, of which 80 are completely new. So all of this is great. And we have cosplayers, which is pretty cool. This is a woman cosplaying as Tamiris, Queen of the Massagetei, who beheaded Cyrus the Great. Bet you didn't know how Cyrus the Great died. Her. So, yeah, it's been going pretty well. But the question that I keep getting throughout all of this is, why rejected? All right, did you pitch these to DreamWorks? Did you pitch these to Disney or Fox or Leica or wherever? No, I didn't pitch I wasn't going to actually try and make the Tank Princess movie because I'm not insane. Well, I wish that I'd pitched that, but I mean, I already know the answer. I think all of us know the answer. And I think that when people come to my website and see Rejected Princesses and sort of get the idea going, they realize that it's sort of an implicit critique of modern femininity. This is sort of a monolithic concept of like we have a very limited group of people that we're taught in history class, and we've got the very limited female role models, and this is how limited it is. And it's sort of seen as a critique of how, the animation studios are spineless. Why don't they do a movie about this person or that person or the other? And that's a facile argument. And this is something that I've tried to get across in how I've talked about this in public. And I'm going to talk about it to you right here, right now. But to really explain this and why it's a facile argument, we need to actually have a history lesson on animation studios. So, very few people remember the early days of DreamWorks because people remember nowadays DreamWorks, where every movie is a Shrek movie. But they neglect to remember that the first movie that DreamWorks ever produced, the climax of that movie, involved the slaying of hundreds and hundreds of children by the Angel of Death. DreamWorks then went on to make a Woody Allen movie for kids, and a movie with a horse that didn't speak for almost the entirety of this movie as the protagonist. None of these movies did particularly well, and several years into DreamWorks being like, oh, we're going to be the great artist enclave that none of the other studios are, the leadership of the studio were basically sitting in the bunker with a gun in their mouth being like, if this next movie doesn't do well, we're done, we got to turn the lights off, and that next movie was Shrek. And that is why every movie afterwards has been Shrek. Now, they've tried to do other stuff, and this is a cyclical thing. If you follow the animation industry like I do, you'll know that many people have tried many, many times to do more interesting things, and almost every single time they have failed. There's Princess Mononoke in the middle, which is the most badass princess of all time. If you haven't seen this movie, her intro in the movie comes with her running over to a giant wolf that has possibly been poisoned, sticking her face in this giant bullet wound, sucking out blood and just spitting it out, just a mouthful of blood. And the first time you see her face, she turns around, smears blood across her face, and tells the main character to get the fuck out. That movie didn't do very well. You have movies like Monsters vs. Aliens, which actually wasn't that great a movie, but it's a literal female empowerment movie. I'm going to guess most people here haven't seen it, but the gist of this story is that diminutive woman at the beginning of the movie is about to get married to the world's greatest asshole who kind of runs over her hopes and dreams and just doesn't give a shit about her. And then she gets magic space powers and grows to 49.5 feet tall. She's not quite the 50-foot tall woman. And the rest of the movie is people asking her, hey, help, save us. And she's like, I can't do anything. And they're like, you're 50 feet tall. She's like, I can't do anything. You're 50 feet tall. And then she's like, wait, I'm 50 feet tall, and I'm rad. And that's the journey of her female empowerment, literal female empowerment movie. Didn't do very well, right? And there's so many other movies that I could point to. I mean, there's Coraline. You follow this, they're not hard to find, but people just don't go to them. Instead, this is what we get. We get the Disney princesses, which everybody knows by heart, right? But even there, there is a certain amount of just the bean counters ruling the roost. So, one of my good friends helps make toys for Disney. I get to hear all of the back and forth of like what's going on behind the scenes and whatever. And one of the little tidbits that she relayed to me was that, and you can argue until you're blue in the face as to why this is, but this is unfortunate and uncomfortable fact that the white Disney princesses sell at a much, much higher rate than the Disney princesses of color. That is why there are not nearly so many Tiana or Pocahontas or Mulan or Jasmine toys out there. Sad but true. And it'd be very easy at this point, as was my initial reaction, and I think it's most people's initial reaction, to just say, this is bullshit. If Disney just made like a really good movie that starred, women of color and like, it'll all be fixed. And I'm here to tell you that that's not as easy as you think it is. And I'm going to tell you why. So this picture came out 2-3 years ago when DreamWorks laid off 1/4 of its workforce. DreamWorks is not in the habit of doing that. This was a horrific event. It happened while I was there. Is in the wake of DreamWorks trying a couple movies that were kind of pushing the envelope for it and for the genre in general that just bombed. Rise of the Guardians, which is sort of like a Avengers for Kids movie, just really, really tanked. And afterwards, they had really no choice but to lay off many, 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 many people. And that sucks. It is very easy for you to say, okay, well, why don't they just do this or that or the other, make the feminist masterpiece that I've always wanted. It is very hard to be that person that is like, okay, I have the vision, and I'm very certain that the trigger I'm pulling right here, right now, will in 5 years hit its mark, that the culture will be where I think it's going to be, it's going to do really well, and instead, you get all of your friends and coworkers fired. The people that you've spent 5 years with when making this movie, the people who have families, who you've met. That's a very, very hard decision. That is not an enviable decision for anybody to make. What I'm trying to impress upon you here is that the people that are operating these studios are people, and they have a conscience about the people around them, and these are hard decisions, and things go slowly. So, who rejects the rejected? Why are they rejected? I'm saying to you, it's not the animation studios that are doing this. It's the public. It's the focus groups. It's you and me and everybody who went out to go see, say, Deadpool, is now, they're going to make 1 million different R-rated movies because Deadpool did really well, but they're not going to take the right message from it. They're not going to take whatever from it. If there was the same groundswell of support for things that were even sort of halfway there, like Monsters vs. Aliens, which was one of the few animated movies that had a female protagonist, you would be seeing a lot more in the way of female protagonists. What I'm telling you is that there are options. And we're living kind of in this golden age of content for people to take a look at. So in no specific order, we have Steven Universe, we have Legend of Korra, we have Gravity Falls, we have Bob's Burgers. There's a lot of really interesting and nuanced portrayals of women out there, and it's just growing. It's been this astounding thing to see over the course of my career even, of how much more. We're living this golden age. But all of these have problems finding their audience. Steven Universe has been doing fairly well. Legend of Korra did so poorly in its final season that the last half was only broadcast online, and they kept switching up the times. Gravity Falls only did 2 seasons. Bob's Burgers is doing all right. But what I'm telling you is, see the change you want to see, right? These things exist. They're out there, and they're not even that hard to dig for. So when I say that we don't have a lot of female role models, we're working on it, and it's out there, but it needs to be supported. And if you're really looking for interesting historical and legendary women, well, I got you covered. Pretty much every week I put up another one, be it a Syrian woman who led a successful rebellion against Rome, or a Latin American revolutionary, or the woman who actually found the structure of DNA and then was cheated out of the discovery by Watson and Crick. Yeah. So come find me online. Come find me after this. rejectedprincesses.com. Thank you.